Hello, and welcome to the Growth and Thriving podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jerry Sunshine Novak, the biker psychologist. And today, I wanted to get a little bit into the idea of how much should we be working in deep work on ourselves, right? Deep work that goes back to past traumas and attachment issues and childhood difficulties. Is there a right time? Is there a point at which that can become too much or detrimental? And I was inspired to this topic by a conversation I was having with a friend earlier this week. So I was at the gym and I was talking to my friend Gayla Love, who many of you probably don't know, but if you know her, you will know that Gayla is I think, a pretty remarkable human being. I don't know her very well, only from the gym. We've talked a few times and we're friendly. But I just have a sense every time I interact with her that there's something special about her. She makes people feel, in my opinion, seen and heard. And she always seems in even the smallest interactions and even the most minute sort of greetings and hey, how you doing, to have a little bit of wisdom or insight or perspective, that to my experience, no even basic interaction with Gayla is truly just basic. It's always a little bit more than that. And you always leave feeling, how many people, just as an example, how many people do you pass in the hallway or on the street day to day and say, hey, how you doing? And keep walking and it's nothing. I never have that experience with Gayla. Even the most simple interaction like that feels like there's something to it and there's some meaning or importance to it in some way. And I'm not sure that I'm describing this well or doing it justice. I don't know, couldn't tell you anything about Gayla's history. I mean, I know her husband, I know she's married, I know they have children. I know she's incredibly athletic and fit. But I get the sense when I interact with her that she is somebody who has overcome some adversity and hardship in her life and has landed in a really growth-oriented, holistically healthy, spiritually healthy, physically healthy, interpersonally healthy, I don't know, but I would guess maybe financially healthy kind of place. She just has a quality that makes me think that she's seen some difficulties and overcome some difficulties, and now it's like a privilege to know her. So I was interacting with her at the gym and we were having a conversation, and she was telling me about a friend of hers who tends to be kind of hyper focused on just sort of chronically, constantly being focused on deep work, on childhood issues, on parent issues, on attachment issues, on relationship issues. And Gayla was relaying a story to me in which she said, she mentioned something to this friend, and the friend said, oh, that sounds like childhood trauma, and that sounds like, something to dig into. And a little bit sort of exasperated, Gayla said, isn't there ever a point where you can not be doing deep work? Can't you just give yourself a break once in a while? And it made me think that the breaks are very, very important. I would say when I was working as a therapist doing therapy, I thought the best cadence, the people who had the most success from therapy, were people who would identify an issue that needed some work, and they would go into therapy and hack away at it hard, really work on themselves diligently for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months, maybe a year, but make a good chunk of progress. And then quit for a while, take some time off, stop going to therapy. It doesn't mean you stop growing completely. It doesn't mean you don't ever think about things with some depth or work on issues of any sort. It just means that you give yourself some rest from the deep, dark, dirty stuff that we need to sort out. Then, a couple of years down the road, you're living your life, and whoop, this thing appears again, right? Or you may think it's a new thing that appears. Oh, now I need to work on this thing. But it's almost never a new thing. It's almost always a new perspective on the same old thing, right? Our growth throughout our lives and our achievements in therapy and in personal growth are almost always invariably like a spiral staircase, right? Here's your core issue. Here's your trauma. Here's your childhood abuse. Here's your, you name it. Here's your attachment issues, trust issues, relationship difficulties. And at the bottom, it's very obvious, like, oh my God, my relationships are a disaster. I have these attachment issues. And you make a bunch of progress. So you sort of go up the spiral staircase. And then you start to bump into, like, well, I don't know why I'm having all these professional difficulties lately. Seems like I'm in conflict with everyone at work and I can't seem to get along. And you start to work on it and you realize, like, oh my goodness, that's the same issue. It's just manifesting differently. So you start to work on it again and you create some distance. You go up that staircase. And then a few years down the road, you have children and you're having these difficulties with your children. Your children are making you want to, like come unhinged. And you can't figure out what the issue is with these kids. And then you look and it's, oh my God, it's that same issue again. It's just now it's manifesting through my kids. So you do some work on that and you look at parenting and examine that and you spiral staircase up and you just spend the rest of your life, growing, progressing, going up the staircase for sure, but always around the same like core issue. And so I think the people who got the most out of therapy when I was a therapist were people who worked real hard, were very diligent for several months or, a year and a half, whatever length of time it took, and then went and lived their lives for a few years and enjoyed the fruits of their labor, enjoyed the benefits from the progress they made. Then, when an issue would reemerge or a new issue would emerge, and they didn't feel like they had the resources to tackle that issue on their own, they'd come back to therapy and roll up their sleeves and dig in and work real hard and spend another several months, making progress, chipping away, hacking away at it until they made some progress and had some resolution. And then stop doing therapy for a while, go live in the world, enjoy your newfound growth. And then eventually, sooner or later, you change, right? It's your issues don't change, but you do. And then when you change, your relationship to those issues changes. And so then you go back to therapy and you work on it again. And this happens in most areas of human, I don't know that it's just human, but at least for us in human well-being. If you decide to try to build some muscle, right? Building muscle is the longevity organ. So building muscle helps keep you alive longer and healthier. So you decide to start building muscle, you go to the gym and you start working hard in the gym. You have to lift heavy things to build muscle. You can't lift really easy weights. It doesn't matter if you lift them 5 times or 105 times. I'm not saying there will be no benefit from it, but you won't build muscle, not well. So you lift heavy things and you sweat and you perspire and sometimes you're sore after workouts and you drag yourself to the gym in the rain and in the cold and when you don't want to go and early in the morning and whatever else. And then after, 3 months or so, between 8 and 14 weeks, you go through what they call a deloading phase, where you take a break and you spend 6 or 8 weeks lifting relatively light, comfortable weights, It may not even be 8 weeks, but a couple of weeks, maybe 3-4 weeks. You lift much lighter loads. You just go in for like maintenance workouts, and it's much more, pleasant. It's not nearly as challenging. But even during that deload, and then after the deloading phase, you would create a new phase that's different from the original one, but still very taxing and very difficult on the body because that's how the body grows. And then after 3 months or so of that, you go through another deloading phase and then a new challenge phase, difficult phase. And, people find there's good research demonstrating that people will experience muscle growth. They'll build muscle during those effortful phases, but they'll also experience muscle growth, continued growth, during the deload phases when they're working less hard. And the explanation physically for that is that they're recovering more. So when you recover better, you get more benefit, right? All of the benefit from fitness comes in the recovery. So as they recover better, they get more muscle growth. Emotionally, spiritually, interpersonally, in these other areas of our lives, I think what happens is, when you're in therapy or you're working with a coach, like I do, you start to anticipate new ways of being. You look at your old habits and your old tendencies and you see that they're not serving you anymore. They probably did at some point, but they're not anymore. And so you start to think about, how else would I like to handle whatever it is, conflict? How would I like to handle boundary setting? How would I like to handle anything? Speaking my mind, right? Speaking my truth, if you tend to not, right? Whatever your pattern is, you start to think about new and different ways to do that. And then maybe you would experiment with the therapist. And that's a pretty safe, controlled environment. Therapist is by default supportive and on your side. So, and I'm not talking about role play. I'm not talking about rehearsal. I'm talking about, at some point, maybe the therapist says something and you don't agree. And where your natural tendency would be to let it go, you actually say, you know what? I disagree. Right? And a good therapist will be like, awesome, that's amazing, right? We want you to disagree. Great. Talk to me about that. And so you made some growth, right? Sure, you normally would not have said anything to the therapist, but now you have. And so that's growth. But when you feel like you've made enough progress to stop therapy for a little while, and you go out in the world, and you're living in the world, and you're speaking your mind or setting your boundaries or doing whatever new pattern you're doing with your boss, with your coworkers, with your friends, and heaven forbid, the most difficult place to make changes with your family. And the amount of growth that happens from that is exponentially greater than the growth that happened in the therapy office, because you're actually implementing it in real time. So taking breaks from that deep work, from sorting it all out and thinking about it, is really important. It affords you the opportunity to live with your newfound insights, to live with your newfound wisdom, and see how it fits in your day-to-day life, right? It reminds me of a story about the Shaolin Temple in China. And it's the morning, and all of the monks at the Shaolin Temple are doing their morning chores. And two relatively new disciples see the abbot from the temple, and he's an old man, and he's got a stick on his shoulders with water, a bucket of water on each side, and he's carrying the water up the steps, trying to bring it up to the temple, and he's hunched over under the weight of the water. And the disciples run up to him, and they say, Abbot, we don't mean to interrupt, but we were wondering, could you tell us, what is enlightenment like? And without saying a word, the abbot puts the water down, and without the weight of it on his shoulders, he stands up tall and free, takes a deep breath, without being weighed down. And the disciples say to him, "Oh, we think we understand. We get the metaphor. We understand. Just one more question, and we'll go on with our chores, Abbot. What comes after enlightenment?" And without saying a word, the abbot bends over and shoulders the stick with the water and starts walking back up the stairs. The idea is, you live in the world, you do your chores, you carry your water up the stairs, and then you have these periods of meditation or therapy or coaching or exercise or whatever it is. You have deep in work on yourself. And during that meditation, in the case of Buddhists, if you are diligent enough and you work hard enough, you get this moment of enlightenment, of nirvana. You just have this moment of feeling connected to everything and understanding things at a deeper level, right? You've literally changed the way your mind functions for that moment. Or in therapy, you've had great insights and great realizations, and you understand your patterns more and how maybe childhood experiences or past traumas have influenced those patterns. But then what comes next? Well, what comes next is you just keep living in the world. You just keep living in the world. And hopefully, my hope is that the abbot at the temple was able to do his morning chores with a little bit more peace and joy than the others who had not experienced nirvana, or maybe trudging through, maybe hating every minute of there. If you've ever had to do a chore that you didn't want to do and you just resent every minute. I feel that way actually when I run. I don't particularly like to run, but I feel like it's a good survival skill, and I try to make sure that at any given point I can run like a 5K, like 3 miles or so, at a reasonable pace. And so I do train it, once every 10 days or so I'll go for a run. Every 5 to 10 days I'll go for a run. It's not a frequent thing, but I do it. And typically, not always, but typically when I do it, I kind of hate every step I'm taking. I hate every second of it. And I imagine that the disciples at the Shaolin Temple were doing their morning chores with that kind of mentality, right? Hating every minute of it. And my hope is that the abbot, after his experience of enlightenment, is doing his chores with a little less inertia, right? A little more joy. And same holds true for deep work, whether that's growth, whether that's thriving and putting together the life you want, or whether it's therapy. By the way, the difference is if this is baseline functioning, when you're in therapy, it's because something dropped you below baseline. So you have depression or anxiety or PTSD, or something is preventing you from functioning at baseline, or keeping you in a lot of emotional distress. And the idea is that therapy is treatment. It's medical treatment. It brings you back up to baseline. When I talk about coaching or thriving or personal growth, what I'm talking about is being at baseline. Baseline means there's good days and there's bad days, and you're able to manage them. But it's going from here to here, right? To thriving, to creating a life you're really excited about. And there's still bad days in a life you're really excited about. It's just for the most part you're functioning at a higher level. And so in any of those areas, it's important to take breaks, because you do this work, you do this personal growth, you work on your, whatever it is, your self-compassion, you work on your growth mindset, you work on your mindfulness, you work on these things hard. And then you take a breather and you go live in the world. And hopefully, now that you're just living in the world, you're doing so more easily than you did in the past. Your newfound skill set, your newfound insight, your newfound wisdom is helping you endure the things you've always endured, just with a little less hardship, with a little more joy and a little more lightness. And so, to answer Gayla's question about can't you ever take a break, I say think of it like a deloading phase in your physical training routine, and that you continue to grow in between periods of hard work on yourself. You continue to grow while you're out in the world using the skills you developed. But even more than that, in my opinion, more important than that, is if you spend the next 10, 15, 20, 25 years constantly working on hacking away at your trauma, hacking away at the hardships you've been through, dealing with your personal distress, with your life's disappointments, if you're constantly doing shadow work and looking at the ugly parts of yourself that you don't like to admit to, and you are constantly working on making those better, you're constantly forever trying to be a better parent to your children, a better friend to your friends, a better partner to your partner, right? You're working on being a better person all the time, and you are never taking time off to enjoy the world around you and to enjoy the progress you've made, and to take a deep breath and enjoy what you've cultivated in yourself, then it almost seems not worth doing the work in the first place. Right? If you're creating a meaningful existence for yourself, you're creating a life of fulfillment and meaning, it seems important to me anyway that you take periods of time to sit back and enjoy the meaning and fulfillment you've created. So I do think it is not only okay, but vital that we take periods of time off from the hard, deep, emotional, interpersonal, spiritual work that we do, even the hard physical work that we do, right? Bodybuilders, right, put their bodies through all kinds of stress to get ready for a show. But after the show, most of them take a break and they eat, more freely than they did beforehand. They still work out, but not with the same intensity, not with the same rigor, right? They don't want to let themselves go. They just don't, stay as rigidly consistent as they were before. MMA fighters after an event will, or jiu-jitsu fighters or wrestlers, or after a meet, will take a little time to rebound. Football players, basketball players all have an off season, right? They still train if they're smart. They still train during the off season, just not with the same kind of intensity that they train in the preseason. Preseason is usually the hardest intensity. So go work on these things, work on these skills, roll up your sleeves, get dirty, fight hard, look at yourselves deep in the mirror. Think about growth. Think about thriving. Think about stacking one block on top of the next, until you can create the life that you want, the life that feels like thriving. And during certain points, it could be times in the year, like every autumn or every spring. Or it could be at the end of work intervals, like, wow, I've made some progress, time to take a break. I set a goal and I met it. Now I'm going to take a break, right? If your goal is to run a marathon, after the marathon, take a break. Go out and enjoy a couple of light runs here and there, but take it easy and let yourself enjoy what you've accomplished. That's the importance of doing the work. You'll still be a better person. You'll be a better parent. You'll be a better employee or a better entrepreneur or a better supervisor or a better leader or a better partner. You will. But it's important. So that's my response. Gayla, as always, you made me think very deeply about something that seemed like kind of a simple conversation when we had it. And I appreciate you for that. I love you for that. I consider it a privilege to know you and to have you in my life. And I'm glad that I was able to record a podcast episode that addressed what I think is a really important issue. Because honestly, no matter what area we're talking about, whether we're talking about physical fitness or nutrition or finance or spirituality or mental health or relationships, the two mistakes I see people make are at either ends of the continuum, right? I either see people who do nothing about them, people who eat with reckless abandon and don't manage their nutrition at all, people who don't exercise or take care of their bodies, their mobility, their strength in any kind of way. People who don't look in the mirror and see how they influence their relationships or go to therapy ever for any kind of reason, or don't work with a coach to be, a better leader or a better partner, a better parent. That's one mistake I see, is the assumption that how you are is how you are. And that's not necessarily true. That's not a growth mindset. Growth mindset says no matter how good or bad you are at something currently, with effort, you can always improve, right? You may never be the best, right? If I decide I want to play the violin, I may never play at Carnegie Hall. I may never be first chair in the Philharmonic, but I can definitely be better tomorrow than I was today. I can definitely be better next month than I am now. And so that's one mistake, is just not working on anything at all. But the other mistake, which I think, while it falls all the way at the other end of the continuum, I think it comes from a similar personality type and a similar mindset as the folks who don't do anything, is the folks who get so obsessed that they can't leave it alone for a moment, right? They are so committed to their ketogenic diet that they can't, go to an event, go to a wedding, go to Thanksgiving and have some dessert, right? And I get it. Dessert's not on the ketogenic diet. But I would say that unless you have a seizure disorder, you don't really need to be on the ketogenic diet either. For most people, for the overwhelming majority of people, your diet probably shouldn't have a name. It should just be protein forward, reasonable energy expenditure, reasonable amount of calories, and generally whole foods. As little processing as possible in the foods you choose. And if you do that, you're better off than like 95% of people. Now, if you're an elite competitor in a sport or something, it might be different. If you have food intolerances or allergies or something like a Crohn's disease, that digestive issue, that could be different. But for the general population, there's no need to be that rigid. There's no need to be rigidly carnivore or rigidly zone or whatever. So that's the other end, is people become obsessed. They become obsessed with their workout program, right? Whatever it is, CrossFit is it, Orange Theory is it, or powerlifting is it. And I'll tell you, nothing is it. Everything has its benefits and everything has its limitations. And as long as you're getting your rear end, I was going to say into the gym, but as long as you're doing something 3 or 4 times a week that causes you to like work against resistance and build some muscle, and doing something between 1 and 4 times a week that elevates your heart rate at various levels, some lower, some higher, you're doing amazing things for your health. It doesn't matter if you're adhering rigidly to a specific program. And so the answer, I think, for most people, which is really hard, and the reason it's really hard, which maybe is a different podcast, but the reason it's really hard, part of the reason anyway, is because you have to take responsibility. If you live in the middle, right, if you're not on either end, if you're not here and you're not here, but you live in the middle, and you spend time working on yourself, and you're focused on your nutrition, and you have good fitness habits, and you also take time off and decide when, for example, if you're going on vacation, you may choose that there's no dietary restrictions for that week or whatever it is, or you may take that week off from exercise, or maybe you decide that you've worked hard on your mental health or your relationships and you're going to take a break from that for a while. I think what scares people off is now you're responsible for those decisions, right? It's not like, hey, here's this program and you have to follow it rigidly. It's like you are making judgment calls about your own life. And what could be more empowering than that? It's scary. And yes, if it goes badly, then yes, that's on you. And you need to reevaluate and say, okay, what do I do differently? But if it goes amazing, that's on you too. So don't be afraid to take breaks. You don't always have to be engaged in deep work. It's probably a mistake to also never be engaged in deep work, but try to find the sweet spot, the balance for you. And while you're doing that, let's try to respect the fact that other people might have a balance that looks different than ours. So anyhow, I hope this has been of value. If nothing else, I talked about Gayla and she'll give me a like, I hope, on this episode of the podcast. But I wanted to thank you as always for your time. I value it more than you know. It fills me with so much joy to hear that people watch the podcast on YouTube or listen to it either on Spotify, on Apple, or on Google. It really, I don't, do this for the podcast for profit. My business is for profit. But this I do for pure love of doing it and for wanting to make sure that there is valuable content available to people at no charge. And so I really appreciate and value your time. If you like this content, please give it a like, share it with your communities. Let's get the word out and spread this further. Definitely leave a comment. If you liked it, I love compliments. However, if there are constructive criticisms or there are things we can do better content, if you have ideas for future podcasts, let me know. Put it in the comments for sure. And last but not least, subscribe so that you will know when new episodes are coming out or other new developments at the Growth and Thriving company, new courses that'll be available and things of that sort. So thank you, and until next time, it's Dr. Jerry Sunshine Novak, the biker psychologist, saying, keep growing until you're thriving.